Welcome to Lawyer Like an Athlete podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Lawyer Like an Athlete podcast with Dr. Amy Wood. I'm your host, Sean O'Connor, and Amy, as you may know, is a licensed psychologist, executive coach, and author of Lawyer Like an Athlete, where she applies elite performance psychology principles to the legal profession. Her work focuses on refining the internal conditioning that drives long-term success. In this episode, we begin examining how disciplined thought conditioning changes performance under pressure. Interesting stuff. Amy, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too, Sean.
Amy, I know lawyers are trained to interrogate claims in court. Why is it that the internal claims often go unquestioned?
Well, that's a really good question. So when you say internal claims, what you're really talking about is what's going on in an attorney's head. Like every adult, we have each and every one of us about 80,000 random thoughts that go through our heads every day. And we have no control over that. And those thoughts can be very neutral. We don't even notice them. Or they can be really positive and they can cheer us up, or they can be very negative. Most adults experience negative self-talk that can interfere with what they're trying to do. And what I find with attorneys, they're very, very focused on what is going on intellectually, where, they're speaking or they're paying attention to someone in a courtroom, for example, or in a client interview. But they're not aware of what's going on inside of their heads, and that has a lot of impact on their performance. So, for example, if an attorney is having negative thoughts that are to the tune of, you're not going to be able to do this, you're not very good, that judge doesn't like you, whatever, that's going to start to erode their confidence and interfere with their delivery. So it's really important to know what's going on inside your head as an attorney, as it is for all of us, so that you can challenge the thoughts that are interrupting you that maybe aren't based in reality. They're kind of irrational. But in order to do that, and here's the catch for attorneys, you have to slow down. You can't be moving all the time. You have to, listen to what's happening in your head.
Right. I love this idea of applying the same rigor that you would bring to the courtroom to your own internal dialogue. So let's say, a stressful thought surfaces, stress, you feel stress in your body. That feels like a fact. What changes when someone treats it like a claim requiring evidence rather than a verdict?
Well, the key here is to not immediately take every thought that you have as fact, because as I said, it's mostly random thought that we experience as human beings. And a lot of it is irrational. And it may be based on, let's say, something that happened 40 years ago in your childhood. A very concrete example of that might be, let's say that when you were a kid, the dog next door bit you when you were 3 years old. So now you're terrified of dogs. So if you see a dog, you have this thought that, oh my gosh, I'm in danger, when that's really not based on your current reality. So anytime, this is what I tell attorneys, anytime you're feeling extremely stressed, or even stressed in a way that's interfering with your focus and your performance, take a look at the thoughts that are going through your head at that time, because thoughts create our emotions. So when we have a thought that creates anxiety, that takes away from our focus, and then we begin to make decisions in alignment with escaping the fear that we're having. So you want to make sure that your thoughts that are distracting you are really worth your time. And so I call this taking your thoughts to court. So if you're feeling really stressed and you're having a thought that is getting in your way, look at that thought and say, okay, would this thought that I'm having right now actually stand up in court? Do I actually have evidence of this thought? So let me give you a very common thought that attorneys have. If I'm not perfect, I'm going to fail. If I'm not perfect, I'm going to get fired. If I'm not perfect, I never should have become an attorney, because they're told they have to be perfect, which of course is totally unreasonable. It's not possible to be perfect. We all make mistakes. So if you're an attorney and you're having that thought, oh my gosh, I made a mistake, it's all over for me. Okay, wait a minute. What evidence do I have that if I make a mistake, I'm done? And to the contrary, what evidence do I have from my life, if I look back over my history, that if I make a mistake, I actually may improve from making that mistake. I may learn. I may actually get to a better place. When you
Hmm.
take your thoughts to court like that and challenge them, you see that there's really, for these irrational thoughts, no evidence at all. And more evidence if you've already been through some tough times in your life, which we all have, that you're going to get through whatever this is too. Mistakes are just part of being an attorney. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
other examples of that.
Yeah, yeah, and again, uh, it's that whole idea of like, okay, so thinking about your billable rate, is this thought process worth your time? It might be below your pay grade, you know? Uh, but and I think of, lawyers as being, high achieving people, generally speaking. I mean, it does take a degree of, you know, drive and intelligence to achieve, to get your law degrees, etc. That you touched on it, like, oh, I've got to be prepared. I can't show weakness. I can't make mistakes. I mean, I'm guessing those thoughts, those standards are probably from childhood, or is there some other mechanism that these standards get formed in the first place?
Well, it's, from a variety of factors. If we think of the whole nature, virtue versus nurture idea, it's all combined. Sometimes it could be mostly nature, sometimes it could be mostly nurture, but typically it's a combination of both. So let's take, an example of it. The average attorney is very, very ambitious and perfectionistic and very driven and hardworking. So let's say that they were born into a home where their parents really valued that. And so they became like their parents. They had this belief because if they saw let's say their father going off to work every day during the week and coming home late and always being stressed and saying, I have to work hard to make a living, they may internalize that belief and become that way. And they may go through life with that, and that may become more entrenched as they go through challenging academic experiences where they excel and come out on top. And then you go from there to, let's say, getting through college, getting into law school, passing the bar exam, working at a highly demanding law firm where these beliefs, they began in childhood, but then they just get more and more ingrained as you find yourself in experiences that strengthen those beliefs in a way that eventually, for most attorneys, really starts to hamper you instead of
Yeah.
fortify you.
Yeah, it's like, thinking about, my own experience and like, okay, there's a skill or a defense mechanism I learned as a younger person to cope with whatever was going on in my family dynamic or, whatever it is. And there's a point at which that behavior doesn't really serve me anymore. And I'm thinking,
That's right.
on the lawyer's side, I mean, the old expression, it runs in the family. I mean, it's not uncommon, like, oh, my dad was an attorney, so I'm an attorney, it's like
Yes.
doctors, that sort of thing. But
Yes.
and so a certain level of standard and high expectation, it's a good thing. It drives excellence.
Hmm.
But at what point does it devolve into like chronic tension? I mean, I'm
Yeah.
thinking even health problems probably, but what's been your experience there?
Well, my experience is that it's great to have that kind of ambition and to have that kind of drive and determination. And there's a book that I really like. It's not for lawyers, it's more for people in management and business, but it's called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And I think that's a perfect way of describing what happens with this dynamic with attorneys, where, what got you here, working more than everybody else, striving more than everybody else, trying harder, really caring about your perfection, being perfect and your performance and all of that, putting that at the center. That's what got you into law school. That's what got you this fabulous job. But there has to be a point where you say, okay, I've arrived to some extent,
Yeah.
and now I can let go of that. It's a much easier thing to do when you're younger. All of us are familiar with being in college and staying up all night to write a paper and being fine the next day. But what happens, Sean, is it begins to break down at a certain point, where you're pushing yourself too hard. And some of these habits that you used to land in this great career, doing this job, getting paid a lot of money, it's not going to work for you anymore. And you have to take a different approach, which is what I'm all about, where you put your work in the center because you've got a big job to do as an attorney. You can't just put it to the side and not care about it, but you have to nurture your performance by taking excellent care of yourself and having relationships outside of work and having other interests. And most important, what we're talking about today is having the right mindset where you spend considerable time looking at your thinking and asking, how can I influence my thinking to be more productive and to be happier and healthier? That's where your power really is.
Got it. And you mentioned earlier this idea, it's a go, go, go thing. You're on the clock, you're a busy person. If you're not busy, you feel less than.
Yes.
You said out loud, it's like, hey, you gotta, press pause, create some space, right? To feel the feels, if you will, and reflect. When
Right.
someone's in that process, you know, what do you tell people in terms of, identifying when they've crossed the line? I'll say symptoms, maybe not the right word, but what are some, red flags that like, "Hey, maybe it's time to make some changes," I guess?
Yeah, well, I would say it's really about how you feel. It's about your own intuitive sense of how you're doing. So if you're finding that you're most of the time not feeling happy, and you're asking yourself questions like, why did I even become an attorney? Or I didn't think it was going to be like this. Or I wish I had more time to have relationships with people. I'm feeling lonely. So if you're asking yourself these questions, and coming up with this answer more than most of the time, although I'd say like 80% of the time, and in answer to these questions you're asking, you're saying, I'm not really happy. This isn't what I thought it would be like. I don't have the life I want. That's
Mhm.
probably when it's time to check in with yourself. I always talk about the climate being more important than the actual weather. So,
Yeah.
we all have really stressful days in every
Right.
profession, but particularly if you're a legal professional, you're going to have a lot of stress. And no matter what you do to manage your thoughts and manage your time and take care of yourself, you're going to have days where you really feel like you've hit a wall. But the important thing is that that's not the climate of your professional experience, that it's not like that most of the time. We talk about this idea, most of us, I want to be happy. But happiness doesn't mean that you're happy every single minute. We have ups, we have downs, but a happy person is someone who can stand apart from their job and look at the big picture of their job and their life. And they can say, most of the time, like 80% of the time, I'm feeling pretty good. So, that's happiness. Again, there's no perfection in any of this.
Right.
But I would say attorneys that find themselves saying a lot to their friends, to themselves, to their therapist, I'm really not very satisfied. It's probably time to do something. You're probably experiencing too much stress because you're not managing your life and your work well.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no way to get rid of the stress. The question is how you manage it, yeah. And things are going to go wrong, right? As you just said. And I'm curious, there's often that knee jerk reaction that it feels like like, oh, hey, I'm trained to know the answer to things. So my first interpretation is something. So, what's the negative impact, of assuming, oh, my first interpretation is, maybe the only possible one. Like where there's that's I'm sure, right? There's got to be some deleterious effects to that idea.
Oh, definitely. It's similar to if you're, I've heard this analogy before. I'm sure you have too. Like if you have one tool, you have a hammer. It's great
Yeah.
when you're trying to hammer nails into a wall,
Yes.
but what if you're trying to screw something in? It's not going to work. Okay, so attorneys need to know that certain beliefs, certain ways of doing things are really great. But then there are other ways that they've been thinking that may have worked in the past, like I can't say no, for example. That's something that attorneys typically experience, this idea that if they say no, they're going to lose their clients, they're going to get left in the dust, they're not going to be successful. So they have to say yes, yes, yes. And when they say yes too much, they can sometimes get burned out because they're not being discerning about who to say yes to. So that's an example. When I'm working with the clients, my attorney clients who I coach, that's something we address. What would happen if you change that belief to, it's okay to say no sometimes instead of I must say yes all the time. So a good rule of thumb here is anytime you have an extreme belief about something, like it always must be this way, like I always must be perfect. I always must be at the top of whatever I'm doing. I always must be a champion in everything. I must always win. That's probably problematic because
Yeah.
extremes are very difficult to maintain because people are imperfect and we make mistakes. And I say this in my book, Lawyer Like an Athlete, that there are a lot of really good athletes who we look at as winners, but they don't win all the time. No
Right.
athlete wins all the time, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's I mean, the athlete analogy is a great one too because, you see athletes on the bench between their shifts looking at replay of what maybe didn't go the way and, the play didn't go the way they wanted the play to go, and they're looking at it and going, "Oh, I see what happened, and now I can improve on it." They put some space between the actual event and their, how they deal with it, I guess.
Right, and then what you just mentioned, taking the space,
Mhm.
to look at how you've been doing something, not necessarily because you made some huge mistake, but assess what you're doing occasionally to see what's working for me,
Yep.
what's not working, where do I want to make some tweaks, not just with your thoughts, so you can soften your thoughts and make them more aligned with reality when they're getting in your way, but also with ways that you work. Is this really working? Or relationships that you have? What can I do to make this relationship better? And attorneys really struggle with these things because not only do they expect to always be perfect and have the right way all the time so that they don't need to assess anything, they just keep doing what they're doing. Um, but the other problem here is even if they want to make these assessments and get this distance and make some revisions sometimes, they feel they don't have the time because they're constantly busy
Yeah.
and they're constantly just reacting to life. They're not taking the time to think through their responses. And reaction, repeated reaction, there's some things we can automate that work well. We can do that with AI or we can delegate certain things to an assistant to be automated. But when it comes to, just doing things in an automated way in reaction to humans, like you get a text message and you say, I'm just going to fire off a quick response without thinking, and that may escalate a
Yeah.
difficult conversation into a conflict or
Yeah. We've all
you
been there.
may yeah, we've all been there. So
Yeah.
it's about discernment. You don't want to overanalyze everything, but
Sure.
especially when you're feeling overly stressed and you're feeling upset, slow down and ask those questions. What am I upset about? How can I process that emotion that I'm having? And if it's something you need to respond to, whether, what should I do right now because I'm stressed? Well, maybe I should just stop pushing myself and go take a 5-minute break and get a glass of water. Or it could
Mhm.
be, this person just said something really insulting to me in that email and I really want to react right now. But wait a minute, maybe it would be better to go cool off and maybe
Yeah.
talk to a mentor and come up with a response that will actually fix the relationship or, make it better somehow.
Yeah. No, that's good advice. No matter what your job, we've all been like, we've all sent that text too soon, I think.
Oh, yes. We all do that. Yeah. So the faster we're moving, yeah, the more mistakes we make, right? When we're moving fast.
I want to ask you this. I mean, not the last question, but for the time we have now, kind of the last. That's all. You know, you've got a client and a lawyer listening to this, and they begin to condition their thoughts instead of accepting them at face value. They're questioning like, um, what do you find? What shifts first? Is it the emotion? Is it performance? Is it something else?
It's usually the emotion. So I do an exercise with attorneys where I ask them, when you're feeling stressed, identify a thought that you're having that is causing the stress. Okay. So it might mean, if let's go back to the perfection. Maybe they're highly stressed and they say, well, the thought I'm having right now is if I'm not perfect, then I'm not going to be able to cut it as an attorney. Okay. And I ask them to come up with just a slightly different thought that may reduce their stress a little bit, such as, it's okay to be less than perfect, or I'm practicing being less than perfect. And I'm getting better at this. Okay. Um,
Yeah.
then identify the feeling that comes from that thought. And usually the stress lessens just from tweaking a thought a little bit. So, one really important thing about this, and I said this earlier, that extreme thoughts are never good. So,
Mhm.
don't ever want to go from an extreme thought like I'm perfect to I'm going to have a different thought. It's okay to be imperfect because
Yeah.
your brain is going to say, you know what, I'm not buying it. So, you want to start incrementally by saying, if you're going from I have to be perfect to, maybe it's okay to be a little less perfect, and so on.
Well, it's fascinating stuff, Amy. We are out of time. I know. I don't know if you mentioned it here, but you certainly in the past, I know you have a book. People listening, how do we find your book?
So, Lawyer Like an Athlete is published by the ABA. So, you can go to aba.org and go directly to their bookstore, or you can go to amazon.com. And any
There we go.
bookstore can order it as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, listen, great to talk to you, and I look forward to future conversations.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much, Sean.
You bet. Well, that wraps up today's episode of Lawyer Like an Athlete podcast. If this conversation made you rethink how much authority you give your own thoughts, you can learn more about Dr. Amy Wood and her book, Lawyer Like an Athlete, at the website amywoodpsyd.com. If you know someone who cross-examines everyone but themselves, send this episode their way. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review so more attorneys can start conditioning their thinking like they condition their arguments. I'm Sean O'Connor. Have a great day.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.